Hi everybody and welcome back. This video will be about functions. Now I apologise, at the end of the last video I said we were going to cover our characters and players. However, I thought I'd just insert this video first because when we get our players and characters we quite often use functions, so I thought it best to cover that first. So I've just carried on from our previous version, but I have turned off enabled for any scripts that are currently in the project, so we're just working with a new script that we'll add now into server script service, and we'll call that our functions script. So we're just going to cover basically what functions are, alright, and we'll make a couple of notes up the top here. So if you're completely new to functions, then it's probably a good idea to write these out as well. So we can think of functions like a bit like machines, all right? So think of functions like a machine that is built to do a certain job. All right, so in your house, you probably have a variety of machines that do specific things. All right, so just like a toaster, all right, it won't do anything until it is used. All right, so your toaster at home just sits on the bench until you actually put some bread in it to do some toasting. So when we use a function, so using a function is we use the term calling. All right, so we're calling a function when we want to use it. So we'll start off and create a basic function. So like a variable, we can type the word local, so this function will just run within this script, and then we use the keyword function, so it lets the program know that we want to name a function next. So it's just like a variable, only it's going to be a function instead, and I'm going to call this one hey function. All right, and when we create a function we put two brackets at the end and just move outside and hit enter, and that is the basic construction of a function. So inside here we're going to put a print statement, and we're going to say hey, and then we will say, I will just say how are you. Alright, so our function is just going to print this line when we call it. Now, as I said before, functions will just sit here and do nothing until you call them. So if we run this now, then we will see nothing come up down the bottom because we're not using the function just yet. It's just sitting here waiting to be used. So to call a function, we simply take its name with the brackets at the end, copy it and put it down here, and we do this afterwards. So the function needs to be declared or created in the code before it is used. So if I took this line and put it up the top here instead, you'll notice it gets an error because it doesn't know, this hasn't been declared yet, so it doesn't know what this is. Alright, so we leave it down. It has to be called below the function. Alright, and if we run this now, then we get the line, hey, how are you? So the function has run. So this kind of function here just performs a task, but we can do much more with functions in terms of feeding it information. So if we move down, let's create a couple of variables for us to use. So we'll say local number 1 will be equal to 8, and local number 2 will be equal to 4, and we'll put here local answer equals, and we'll say nil. We'll just set it to nil. It doesn't have an answer just yet. Now this is a very simple function, and we're going to add these two numbers together, which we could just do here. We don't need a function to do that, but it's an example, and I just want to keep it simple. So let's create a function, and we'll say, give it the name add numbers. All right, add nums. Now, this is our basic function, but we want to enable this function to be able to add any numbers that are passed into it. So inside of the brackets, we can add what are called parameters or arguments that we can pass information to. So we create a variable name for the parameter, and it's best not to call it exactly the same thing as variables you might pass in. So in this case, we'll call the first one n1 and n2. Okay, so these two will represent any numbers that are passed into the function. Now we have this answer variable up here, and we'll make use of that inside of the function. So answer will now be equal to n1 plus n2. Right? And we can, down below here, call this function now to add these two numbers together. Now you'll see it's come up with an error because it doesn't know what n1 is. So what we're going to do is put in number 1 as the first item that we want to pass to the function, and num2 will be the second one. So what's happening here is when we call the function, it's looking for this variable, which is 8, and it will put 8 in here. All right, and it'll put 4 in for the second one. And then the values that are passed here of num1, so 8, n1 becomes 8, and n2 becomes 4. And then answer, all right, changes its value up the top here to whatever the answer is down here. And we can simply type, print out the answer down the bottom here. All right, so let's see what happens there. All right, and as you can see, we get the answer 12 as expected. All right, so once again, this function is just performing a task, but there's a different way that we can write this where we actually return a value back from the function. All right, so we'll just comment, I think we'll comment out this, and we'll type it out again. So you can highlight all of this and right click and then click on toggle comment, and it will just comment out all of that code there. So just below, up above here, we'll create our variables again. So number 1 equals 8, and local number 2 equals 4. But this time we won't put the answer up here as nil, and we'll create the function add numbers and our arguments or parameters. Okay, and down below here we're going to create our answer variable. Now instead of, we're going to actually call the function, and then it's going to give the answer back and assign it down the bottom here. So what we'll do is we'll take add num1 and 2 and put it here, and we need to change these to num1 and num2. All right, then inside of here we're going to add number 1, all right, plus number 2. That's what the purpose of the function is. But what we want to do, you'll see it comes up with an error because it's not being assigned to anything. So we use the keyword return in front of this. So when you use return, whatever follows the return word is what will be passed back to whatever called the function. So the result in here of n1 plus n2 ends up here. All right. Then down below we can print our answer again, and let's see what happens. All right, and as expected we get 12 again down the bottom. All right, so these are two examples of very simple functions. Now, there are many, many ways to use functions for different purposes, but I just wanted to show you that functions are basically blocks of code, and they can have one line or they can have thousands of lines of code within them to perform a certain job. So I just wanted you to be familiar with what they are before we start using them in our future lessons, as we will be using them a lot in our game project that we will be getting to very soon. Alright, so next lesson I will do as promised, we will talk about the player, the character and the humanoid. So I will see you in that lesson.